are hundreds and hundreds of students who have often never experienced a Jewish community before. And within a few hours of sitting around the table, feel they too belong to this people and to this story, and have an instant connection that is sometimes indescribable and difficult to explain, but it goes to the core of their identity. And that has only continued to grow post October 7th. And that's often lost, sadly, in this moment of hate and of pain. But there's a very powerful story happening here and around the world where I would say the soul of the Jewish people has been awakened.
Hello and welcome to State of the Nation. I'm Eylon Levy. Antisemitism has historically been sometimes an elite phenomenon. Not starting on the streets, but actually in the hallways of elite institutions. Because scapegoating Jewish people and explaining how they're the center of all evil in the world, that requires intellectual somersaults. That's how we saw, for example, the famous questioning of 3 Ivy League presidents asked whether calling for a genocide of the Jews would violate their university's code of conduct, and President Claudine Gay of Harvard said, "It depends on the context." My guest today is Rabbi Hirschy Zarchi, the founder and head of Chabad House at Harvard University, where we filmed this episode as part of a series of meetings I had in Harvard to understand what's really going on at America's elite institutions. Together, we discuss the nature of anti-Semitism at Harvard after October 7th and how the situation has evolved in his decades at Harvard. And here's the really interesting point. We spoke about how, in a world increasingly committed to groupthink and ideologies, the Jewish mission in the diaspora is to teach elite institutions to think again. And that's exactly what Chabad at Harvard seeks to do, encouraging the ancient study of texts and difficult questions to get people thinking and not just going along with ideologies that are in vogue today. Let's dive between the lines and beyond the headlines.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
Eylon. What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Rabbi Zarchi, welcome to State of the Nation.
Thank you.
And thank you for hosting us here at Chabad House on campus at Harvard.
It's a privilege.
I want to talk to you because the last year has been extremely disturbing in terms of the uptick in anti-Semitism. And one of the hotspots has been universities. And that's especially disturbing because, as we heard at the event we both attended, hosted by the Harvard Jewish Alliance, where Dara Horn spoke, she said that anti-Semitism is so often an intellectual enterprise. It isn't just a prejudice. There's a whole ideology, a whole intellectual framework that goes along with it. And that's why the anti-Semitism at universities specifically is disturbing, because it points to where things can lead if it's not stamped out. Now, you've spoken about the atmosphere on campus as being an atmosphere of fear. And I still want to believe that's an exaggeration. So tell me why.
Well, when you speak of fear, I think it's on a multi-dimensional sort of feeling, if you wish. Fear. What do they fear? And I would say that has evolved over time. The first stage, I mean, not to if we're hung up on the word fear, it's a heavy attribute to place on the current environment and the feeling of students. I would say started long before October 7th. And the fear then was not physical, for one's safety, but it was a fear of exclusion, of being ostracized, of being denied the benefits and the privileges of the full Harvard experience. And if I have to identify it, I've been asked questions about the current reality often. And when you live in an environment for a long time, it's often difficult to see change. You can often miss it. But there was a moment when I knew that something changed at Harvard. And that was when an Israeli student reached out to speak. She wanted some private time to discuss an issue that was really bothering her. And what turned out is that she was making all these friends at Harvard. She was spending time in a place called Annenberg, which is where the freshmen have their meals. And she noticed that there was a friend of hers who she's grown really close with, and they socialized together. They were talking about rooming together in the coming year. When, as young students typically do, even when they have something as simple as breakfast, they take out their cell phones and quickly grab a selfie, which then ends up on social media. On one such occasion, someone took out an iPhone for a selfie. She was sitting with her friend, and her friend backed out of the photo. To her, that seemed very strange. But she thought maybe she didn't like her hair that day or whatnot. But a funny thing happens 10 minutes later. Someone else tries to do the same thing with her when she's not in the photo, and she's happily smiling. What was that all about? And she couldn't understand it and here they are resuming their friendship and conversations. And it happened a second time. And when she saw a pattern, she understood that this friend of hers cannot afford to be seen on social media publicly associated with her because she'll have to pay a price for it. It wasn't that she wasn't prepared to be friends. She didn't cut her out. They remained friends. They socialized. They spent time together. And she felt it was a genuine friendship. But there was fear, ironically, not in the Jew in this case. There was fear in this non-Jew from the Midwest, who maybe never met a Jew before, who's enamored and intrigued by this new Israeli friend, but is now afraid to be seen publicly associated with her because she then may be excluded from social clubs, from other types of gatherings that Zionists or those who are associated with Zionists are excluded from.
That's fascinating, because what I've discovered from my conversations with Jewish students is that the dynamics that they describe from the pro-Palestinian movement, it can be explained basically as bullying dynamics. There is the pro-Palestinian movement comes along and says, either you side with us and you condemn Israel, and that means distancing yourself from your Jewish and Israeli friends, or we're going to cancel you. We're going to be mean to you. And they find that therefore the fear is actually on the part, not of the Jewish students who should rightfully be angry, but the other people who simply don't want to be hounded out of polite society. And what makes this so disturbing is that the people who are backing off from the Jewish and Israeli students are backing off because the movement that is bullying them claims to have the upper hand morally, to claim moral authority. They have tried, particularly in the last year, to frame Gaza as the great moral cause of this generation. What are you noticing on campus?
What I'm noticing is that although once upon a time the anti-Israel community was a fringe element that people approached as just a noisy bunch of people that we dismissed as
That's what it was like when I was at university.
Yeah, so that always existed.
Fringe vocal minority.
Fringe vocal minority,
they didn't rule the roost.
Exactly. There were a headache, there were disturbance, and you just ignored them. Today, they've entered the mainstream on multiple levels. One cannot deny what you referred to earlier as having penetrated the very fabric of the university, where it was entered the intellectual conversation, the classroom, the discourse.
It's not just that,
the
disciplinary mechanisms as well. Just before starting this episode, I met with Jewish students here at Harvard. And they said that sometimes the university will threaten students with suspension, but they don't go ahead with it because the faculty that has a final say over suspensions overlap with the faculty who are supporting the disruptions in the first place.
That shows you that this is a movement. This is a very deliberate, small group of faculty, but have made it their business as activists to ensure that this disruption and this slander of Israel succeeds. What scholar wants to spend time on an ad board focusing on discipline? They're here to study. They're here to produce scholarship and to teach. So these are not boards that professors are typically looking to be on. So you have very interestingly, a very specific group of faculty who have an agenda to protect violators of campus code of conduct, who want to protect and defend the students who disrupt the institution from fulfilling its essential core mission, which is to teach and to educate. They place themselves on these committees and this is sort of an insight into how the whole infrastructure works on the campus. Very little power at the top. So if a dean, even the president, identifies a student whose behavior is so egregious, paralyzing and disrupting and embarrassing the institution globally, they can do nothing about it without the consent and the approval of this ad board, of this committee of faculty, who's on this faculty committee, who chooses to be on this faculty committee, professors with an agenda to undermine not only Israel, but undermine ultimately the university itself and not allow it to enforce its policies. And you have a paralyzed situation where...
And they do that because they're claiming the moral upper hand, and they're claiming that Gaza, together with Ukraine, right, are the two great moral causes of our age.
Yeah, that's, of course, what I referenced yesterday that you asked me about earlier, and that I find something that is often overlooked, how Gaza Palestinians are boxed into the Ukraine when we all know it's actually.
I mean, just for our viewers who weren't at the event we were both at, it was an interesting thought that I'd love you to unpack again. What is this parallel that is being made between Gaza and Ukraine at the university, and what's wrong with it?
Well, for starters, even at a fifth grade level, Russia and Hamas and Hezbollah seem to have the close ties.
They're allies.
They're allies. So you would think, right? You would think if Hamas is aligned with Russia, it would make them the bad guys if you care about Ukraine. But it's interesting, logic seems to be suspended when it comes to focusing on Jews and Israel. That's one of the most bizarre manifestations of all this. I mean, you referenced earlier how it's intellectually and part of the curriculum and part of the teaching and some kind of a worldview. But when you actually have conversations with people, you find that the suspension of reason, there is no logic often. There's such profound ignorance and misinformation and, frankly, illogical thinking and rhetoric that no one could defend. And I guess we're living it's a moment where we're beyond reason. This goes to this inexplicable reality of antisemitism. I guess one of the things we often hear is people how they find different reasons at different time. Today, we don't even need a reason. It doesn't even have to make sense.
You really think you don't need a reason? You don't? Because what I find fascinating about anti-Semitism as a phenomenon is that it has its own internal logic. Once you buy into the basic assumptions, everything makes sense within that logic, and it does here too.
No, so I'm not denying and dismissing that there are all kinds of reasons, but once you've made the case and it's become so prevalent that the Jew and Israel is the bad guy, you no longer have to back it up with reason or proof or facts.
And here's the critical point. Jewish students and their allies, and we'll talk about that because they don't have many of them, are already fighting a very difficult battle, because once Israel has been defined as the ultimate bad guy, the floodgates are open. If Israel really is this evil, genocidal, white, supremacist, fascist, apartheid state, whatever, obviously boycott it. And if you're going to boycott it, obviously you boycott anyone who's affiliated with it. And therefore standing up to the lies about Israel is a basic Jewish safety issue, because you're trying to cut things off at source before they get to the point where the baseline, everyone assumes Israel's committing genocide, which it's not. But then the next obvious thing is you need to do something about it. And when I talk to Jewish students, they feel very alone. And they feel very alone not only because they don't have allies outside of the Jewish community. Sometimes they feel that they're telling me not enough Jews are speaking up for themselves. I'm wondering what you're noticing from conversations with Jewish students, with those who come for Shabbat dinners. They're not all activists, and they didn't come to university to be activists. But why aren't more of them speaking out?
It's an excellent question. But the fact is, and we can analyze, how and why that is. But what should not get lost is that there is an incredibly thriving Jewish community here at the moment. In fact, I've often argued that the Jewish community today at Harvard has never been more active, even in terms of numbers, there's never been more
amazing
students participating in Jewish life.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Even though they're a smaller percentage, a number of the school. And yet you're saying they're not as vocal. And I think many students just completely disconnect the two. And that they've learned to sort of isolate themselves and protect themselves, to shut out the noise. Not as easy as it was once in the past, but they've learned to navigate for a whole variety of reasons. One, because you can't reason, so there's nobody to talk to. Well, before that, as you may have heard yesterday, some of them tried to enter dialogue, but because of this new cancel culture, we won't even engage in conversation. So there's no discourse. We won't meet with you, because to meet with a Zionist is to validate a Zionist. So you can't have a conversation even. So there's no longer debate, discussion, an opportunity to learn, to be persuaded.
Which is what I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but university is supposed to be all about, right? Exposing yourself to ideas, challenging your own preconceptions, engaging with theories even that you disagree with in a spirit of intellectual curiosity. But that's the nature of the demonization of Zionism and increasingly of Jews, that it's just something you don't engage with because you think you have the ultimate truth on your side.
Yeah, and that failure is happening on two levels. One is on a university level where there simply isn't the course and the opportunity, the courses or the opportunities to study in a classroom to actually be educated on the issue. To me, a striking example was a month after October 7th. It was midnight here, hundreds of students outside of Chabad. And I noticed there's a young Egyptian girl here, smiling, having fun, enjoying her time with her friends. And I know that she's very friendly with one of our student leaders, actually, a student on the Chabad board. And it struck me because we were incredibly vocal, passionate about the issues, not to mention horrified with a deep sense of pain as well. And it just struck me like she was sitting here all evening. What did she make of it? So I approached her. Well, I will name her. She's currently in the college. And I asked, how are you? It's nice to see you. Did you enjoy yourself tonight? And she's trying to avoid me. But I guess I'm the host, so she's being polite. I'm pressing because I'm really curious about this. And I said, "How are you being affected by what's happening at this moment?" Again, she tries to avoid. I said, "Look, I promise you, anything you tell me it won't change anything how I feel about you. Think about it. You'll always be welcome here. We love you." So she says, "I'll be honest with you, Rabbi. I've turned off social media." Now, I still don't know what she means by that. So I figured, whatever I was asking, she was like sort of giving me a neutral answer. So let me ask you the following. You grew up in Egypt. Your neighbors are Israel. You have Jewish friends here at Harvard. You're here at a Jewish center on a Shabbat. How do you see or understand and relate to your neighbors at Israel, which is a country that you have peace with? At home, in the mosque, where she would attend as a family in school, how do they speak about the people of Israel? And again, she refuses to answer. So I pressed her. I said, "Please, I promise you, whatever you say." Okay. Honestly, that they displaced another people. So I asked her, does she have any insight into another narrative? That's the position she was raised with. And I thanked her for sharing it. And I really appreciated it. Did she ever hear a counter perspective on that? A narrative from her Jewish friends, Israel friends, about, she says no. So I asked her, did you ever take a class at Harvard? Scientific history, biblical history, archaeological history, a history that the Jews have presence in the land, that have a claim to the land, that have a historical presence there, that would suggest that they didn't displace. She couldn't. And she sees I'm getting frustrated. This can't be mine. It's got to be something to point, even if you don't agree with it. And then she says, "Oh yeah, I have something." So what is it? She Al-Quds. And I have to admit, I wasn't sure what that meant. My Arabic is not so good. So I asked her to translate it. She couldn't translate it for me. She takes out her iPhone and she shows me it means Jerusalem. So I asked her, "No, so what's the connection?" All faiths have a home in Jerusalem. So by virtue that Judaism and Israelis belong to the Jewish faith, and Jerusalem is the headquarters, or sort of the capital where all faiths have emanated from. There's a relationship. It told me all I had to know. Here you have someone that Harvard admitted. For diversity, we have kids from Egypt, from Jordan, from every country in the Middle East, who grew up in a reality and an education and a culture that raised her to believe that the existence of Israel and Jews in Israel is a form of displacement. She's at Harvard for 2.5 years and was never exposed to a narrative, to a history that tells a different story, that goes beyond the last 50 years. They could take her back, forget about 1,000, how about 4,000 years? No access to biblical history, to archaeological history. I mean, but hold on. Did she not really know? Or she too? Right? You can see that, how the mind works. You filter out facts that come before you. But the reality is that there was no course that she was required to take that would expose her to a narrative of the Jewish people. And for that matter, as I suggested to her, non-Jewish history. did not have it. And ironically, and goes indirectly to the question you asked, troubling is that even her Jewish friends, so you didn't get it in the classroom, but what about in the dorm? What you mentioned, what university life is supposed to be like. I mean, we all remember the day when you're up all night debating and asking the big questions of life, and
but that's not happening.
That's not happening.
Are you trying to get Jewish students actively to change their approach in terms of speaking out and educating their friends?
So, I am, but I've learned in the process of trying that we're living in a different moment. We're living at a time right now, even besides for the cancel culture, but for all the reasons that we've touched on or not touched on yet, one of the results is that we've created a dynamic in the world today that people just don't have difficult conversations anymore. So it's almost like inappropriate and it's not polite to talk about something that may make someone uncomfortable. So if we're roommates. I remember saying to a Jewish student,
this doesn't compute. I'm Israeli. We don't have conversations that make people comfortable. This is all we do.
Welcome to the American university, right? I remember once saying to a student, I mean, this is a roommate of yours. If you're not going to challenge their thinking, they may one day support the killing of your people. If you're looking at what's going on, right? If they're going to, how could you not have that conversation? And
people don't have difficult
They want to be in college. You want to have fun. You want to get along. And perhaps this is a conversation that you're never going to see eye to eye on. But
that's such a fascinating insight, because part of what I'm finding as I try to make the case for Israel is I try to explain that Israel faces difficult choices all the time, every day. There is no easy option. It has only impossible dilemmas, where whatever it does, there's going to be a horrible cost. Israel has to make difficult choices, and Israelis know that life is about making difficult choices. And it's so obvious to me that perhaps I don't appreciate abroad, in a modern, developed Western country that has been largely shielded from difficult dilemmas, that basic capacity for making difficult choices is just not part of it's just not a muscle that is trained as part of discourse. And perhaps part of our challenge in explaining Israel's story and helping people understand Israel is that they're not even used to thinking in terms of difficult choices. They think in terms of outcomes. They want the war to go away because it's horrible. They don't understand the Israeli dilemma that we need the war to go in a way that ensures Hamas can't restart the war. That's interesting. They're not used to difficult choices and difficult conversations.
But you see, when you talk about difficult choices, one has to also consider the fact that one of the difficult choices is that if you become educated on the issue and you understand, you have moral clarity on the issue, it requires you, it obligates you to take a position. If you claim to be a moral person with moral views, and to take that moral position in the context of Israel, which is really the core issue we're struggling with here, is costly, because you don't have an audience that would even engage with you. And by virtue of you declaring an association or sympathy for Israel, not to mention expressing support for Israel, you're absolutely canceled by significant numbers of your peers. And the rest who won't do so just don't want to associate because they're afraid that they'll be guilty by association, and that will risk their opportunities. And kids at Harvard are very ambitious. They have big dreams. It's maybe self-absorbed, but they're trying to reach certain places in the world and achieve certain status, certain opportunities, and they feel those doorways will be closed to them. And so it's not worth it to invest in this issue. They'll tell you there are many injustices in the world. They'll focus on inequality, on hunger, and on other problems of society, on the environment, on the planet. This issue, even if you're right, it's too risky, personally, for my college career and my professional career to identify and invest my energy and my identity in. I think that's, if I had to point to one thing more than anything else for the majority, and I still think it's a majority, it may be a smaller majority, but the majority of students who have a sense of clarity in this moment, I mean, is it that difficult to see who the terrorist is and who the victim is? But
it is so critical to speak up and not allow these universities to get sucked down the rabbit hole of believing or sympathizing with these extremist ideologies. Dara Horn made a fascinating insight yesterday at the Harvard Jewish alumni event. She said that before the Second World War, German universities were the best in the world. But it was from those universities that the violent extremism spread, because it was rationalized within a whole framework in which violent anti-Semitism made sense. And now these universities are local colleges with nice buildings, was how she put it.
Yeah,
and that we need people to speak up, because either you're going to defend the concept of an academic institution based on academic rigor and asking difficult questions and investigating, or not, and you're going to build organizations that are just, grade factories and not doing their job, and along the way sympathizing with extremist ideologies. I'm wondering how you see your role as Chabad, specifically on campus, as opposed to Hillel, which is trying to be a big tent. Chabad has always seen itself as having a purpose, having a mission, having a calling. What is that calling at this moment?
I mean, now you're asking me about the core of my life and the core of our work.
Yes.
And that's, and in this moment, we've spoken out on issues that in the past we didn't have to, because, the makom sheinish, when there weren't others to speak up, we felt obligated to speak up. But of course, the core mission of our work is to remind every Jew on this campus about the majesty of their heritage, the glory of their tradition, and to invite them to taste, sometimes for the first time, and experience and be introduced to the wisdom and the experience and the ideas and the values of Judaism that have animated our people from the beginning of time and have served as a model for civilization, to build a civilization and a society, to come home to their identity, to their people, and to be empowered by the knowledge and the experience and the joys of Jewish community, of Jewish identity, and of Jewish traditions. And it's a remarkable story. I mean, I mentioned earlier, we come out here on a Friday night or any night of the week, and there are hundreds and hundreds of students who have often never experienced a Jewish community before. And within a few hours of sitting around the table, feel that they too belong to this people and to this story, and have an instant connection that is sometimes indescribable and difficult to explain, but it goes to the core of their identity. And that has only continued to grow post-October 7th. And that's often lost, sadly, in this moment of hate and of pain. But there's a very powerful story happening here and around the world where I would say the soul of the Jewish people has been awakened. And we're seeing that manifest itself here in a most moving way, and that work continues unabated. Now, part of being Jewish is displaying and being empowered to live with Jewish values. And the Jewish value is to speak the truth and to stand up to injustice, and certainly to defend the victims of not only of hate but of murder. So there's absolutely, as you said, a real moral duty. Not only for Jews, but we try to model that for the non-Jewish community.
And that's exactly that. Do you see your role as Chabad as specifically encouraging pride among the Jewish community, which is a minority here, getting them educated and to appreciate their heritage, and that's it? Or do you, as an organization that it's not a missionary organization, but it is an outreach organization, see a role engaging non-Jews and trying to build alliances on campus?
So it's interesting. Increasingly, non-Jews are flocking to Chabad. And they're coming here for a number of reasons. It's become clear. One is...
They come here for Shabbat dinners?
For dinners, for programs.
Well, they're not worried about a selfie at a Friday night dinner at Chabad house, right? Well, that's why you can meet Jews and be safe that there won't be a selfie.
But there are events during the week they come to too. So that would be for those who want to avoid the selfie, would be Friday night. But they're coming. It's kind of funny that you mentioned that. But
this is a safe space to meet.
Friday night you're safe off the camera, but they're coming even when they're being photoed.
Okay,
and that's good news.
What do they want? What do they see?
I think they're looking for friendship and a community that is filled with purpose and values. And I've heard that as well. But, interestingly, I've also heard that they enjoy the conversations here and they enjoy the community here. And what I think what they're referring to is, go figure, but maybe it's at Chabad. Maybe that's the last place on campus where you can actually ask questions. You can actually challenge and be in a debate about any subject without being canceled, without being afraid of being judged. And you can actually learn something. So, this is an environment, just like every Jew knows, they can question every aspect of Jewish faith. They can come in, we have Jews of every conceivable background, Jews who declare themselves to be atheists, and they're equally welcomed and loved and embraced as part of the family. And I think non-Jews appreciate that atmosphere and that culture in terms of how we approach conversations and doubts and questions and challenges on any subject. And maybe this is the last vestige of Harvard where you can ask any question, challenge any axiom, and be respected for it and not be canceled for it. And in fact, we love when people come with their questions. And
Let me bounce an idea off you.
Okay.
Let me bounce an idea off you, because we're having a chavruta here, and
Okay.
I think it's really important for Jewish students and Jewish communities more generally to have a sense of collective purpose. And a sense of collective purpose that can't just be about fighting anti-Semitism or Holocaust commemoration, which is very important. But when you see that the American Jewish community has spent so long making Holocaust commemoration a critical part of Jewish identity, you see very high rates of assimilation, because I don't think it's surprising that an identity that is based about fending off hatred, that people hate us for who we are, is not something that is inherently attractive. So what is that mission going to be? And if there's a crisis within Western intellectual spaces where they're dogmatic and people don't ask questions and they shy away from difficult questions, and that's a threat to democracy. That is a threat to democracy if elite institutions do not encourage critical thinking. And that's what Judaism has always been about. It's been about having arguments l'shem shamayim, for the sake of the heavens, where we're not going to agree, and we're not necessarily going to agree at the end of the conversation. But we'll have an intellectual argument, and we think, and we're fearless. And I wonder whether that's the message that you need to be sharing with Jewish students. Your role is to try to save democracy, no less, by being the counterculture that embraces radical debate.
So look, we're not shrinking from that, and I see that as an extension of our work. It's not, like you said, our core mission, but it certainly extends from the worldview of Judaism, and increasingly in this pressing moment, directly and more often indirectly, we're exactly addressing and trying in our own way to make a change in that space, and that of course expresses itself whether it's in the world of ideas or it's in the world of courage. And that's a key piece to all this. You mentioned before the infrastructure of the university. The young student who moderated your conversation yesterday, I don't know if
Charlie Cove.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, but just a couple of weeks ago, the very faculty who you referred to earlier as the ones who are vocal and disrupt and protect the violators and the disruptors, shockingly, went into Harvard Yard and broke university code of conduct as an example for the students not to be intimidated by the university.
The faculty did.
The faculty.
What exactly did they do?
And they so one of the new rules is that they regulated is that certain central pathways, not even to chalk, which you might say is a minor matter to chalk messages, but it was a very public pathway, and they want this clear of protest of this is a place where the encampment was, and there's important Harvard symbols there. So that's off limits. So as a way of challenging, the university's authority and its desire to ensure this is a safe place in every sense, and also a place that serves as a home. The students, don't forget, they live in the yard. So if this is your home, you don't want hateful messages on the outside. So free speech, yeah, but not where students have their dorms or have their meals. They chalk there amongst their art is this red triangle. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't so educated about this, but learned that the red triangle, as I'm sure you know, is a symbol that's used by Hamas to target Jews. And I understand in Berlin it's illegal. That's how it's seen.
It's the new Nazi swastika.
It's to the point where it's illegal in Berlin.
And the faculty chalked that in the yard?
Well, this is what Charlie reported. There was a picture of this, so there's the evidence. And he reports this in the Crimson, and expresses the shock
as a hate symbol
that you're displaying as a hate symbol. What happens is that it's somehow removed from his column. I ask, and there's a correction.
It's not removed from the yard, it's removed from his column.
My understanding is I think the university did send in
someone
yard
to
ops
it away, right.
to wash off to wash it away. But apparently what occurred is that these faculty threatened the Crimson that they will be sued if they don't remove it because it wasn't intentional and it was inverted in some way and it was like child play. And I mean, the craziness of the answers here, we have these faculty at Harvard referring to their artwork as just being child play and it was kindergarten art and not with no ill intention, and it was an inverted triangle, so it's and it's red, but that's only accidentally, it's how it happens to be. To me, this is like a case study. You have the faculty who are supposed to, right, obviously be, set an example of discourse, not to mention to follow university code of conduct, violating it. And we saw the violators took the lessons and the next week now shamed Harvard by disrupting the library, which is a sacred space and off limits. When a Jewish student had the courage to expose them, and we're starting to see the benefits and the results of that courage and leadership, they're intimidated.
Hang on, linger on that. What did they do?
My understanding is that after he exposed what they did and this became visible to the world, that we have Harvard faculty essentially drawing swastikas, calling for the symbol of the target Jews physically. Now they're denying they did it. You see, all of a sudden they're embarrassed by what they did, to the point where they're threatening the Crimson. If they don't remove it, they'll be sued. Now you would have thought. Now this is a question about journalists. This is, I guess, your field. If he accused them of drawing it, there's a photo of it. They say they meant something else. So give them an opportunity to respond. What they meant with this red triangle, if it's an inverted triangle, if it's an actual, obliterated. It's gone. Where's the journalistic integrity? You report, and they accused the student. Look, take this further. If that wasn't enough, that he misrepresented the facts. So not only is the report been completely extracted and removed and erased, but now he is being characterized as somehow being unprofessional or being inappropriate by
bullying dynamics
in the journalism, bullying dynamics on the grounds of the school. But what we see, but to me, I saw something positive about this, that all of a sudden we see that when the student speaks up or you expose them, they panicked. They panicked. Now, it led to action that was inappropriate, and it led to action that further exposed corruption in what's supposed to be you wonder about why the future writers of the New York Times or the BBC are going to misrepresent facts or not display the integrity. I think you have a case study on that right now.
And I wonder whether that's the secret for Jewish students who want to fight against the intimidation and the hatred. They are model citizens. They came here to study, and the nutters have gone too far. And the increasing disruption. Columbia, I just visited. Students are not allowed to sit on the grass anymore since the Tentifada. There's security checking whether they can go in. As a result of the campus Tentifada and the disruption of the last year, there has been a crackdown on students' liberties. Everyone is now less free as a result of steps that have had to be taken to shut down this violent extremist movement. And people don't like being exposed. The bullies think that they rule the yard, and they do it because they can get away with it. And maybe the message then for students is, help to expose the nutters and help your friends understand. They don't know what a red triangle means. They don't know what an intifada means. You need to tell them that globalize the intifada is just the politically correct way of saying death to the Jews. And if they say, intifada just means uprising, sure, like Sieg Heil just means hail victory, right? It depends on the context, as they say in Harvard. And there's a clear context, and this is what it means. Help them understand
Absolutely.
that.
And I think we're seeing signs of that change. This is one example, how the faculty, another powerful example of the success of the exposing, I think, is we're seeing, and this is sort of anecdotally, is that I'm hearing from a lot of the freshmen, this incoming class, that they're surprised about the sympathy and the support that they're finding in their peers. This is something we, of course, did not hear last year. And
because they thought it was worse than... They thought there would be more hostility than there actually is.
More hostility. And this is about their peers, specifically in their class, in this incoming class. And what I think occurred here is that parents parents who saw a lot, and these are adults already, when their children were off to college this year, I think sat them down at the kitchen table and gave them a little history lesson. Whether they helped them understand what's happening in the world from an adult perspective that's not informed by what they see on social media, and help them understand basic morality. There's a good guy and a bad guy, and there are killers and there are terrorists, and there's global intifada means death to the Jews, like you're articulating. And perhaps it was merely, don't embarrass us. We don't want you to go into campus and being associated with these nuts or these crazies who are disrupted. You'll get disciplined, and you'll be associated with those who defend rapists and murderers. But whatever it was, whatever motivated, it may have been a combination of both. We're seeing, I think, the result of that, where the students are already coming. They're not running to join this extreme bunch that were getting away with so much due to their faculty, protectors. And I think that's a source of hope. And as well as the extreme measure that it went to, I think is waking up people well beyond the Jewish community as it increasingly becomes death to America, undermining the West, saving democracy, like you referred to. And that's, we're a small people. When it's only us and our good friends that we so value and treasure, it's a small number. When everyone feels attacked personally, I think, ironically, that's going to be the redemption for the Jew in Israel as well.
Rabbi Zarchi, it's been a year since the October 7th massacre. I'm wondering, how do you think this year is going to be different on campus compared to last year?
How is it going to be different? I think the answer lies with us. Are we going to continue to be intimidated or afraid? Or are we going to show pride, courage, and fearlessness to tell the truth, to hold people accountable? And we're starting to see signs of that. Well, if we continue to do that, I think we'll empower more and more people and we'll give them the permission to participate and enter a space and a conversation, and ultimately start taking positions and not being afraid of some extreme fringe that may criticize you or try to exclude you. And find your voice, find your conscience, and ultimately, what I often with the students, ultimately, what's beautiful to hear from them is that the freedom, right? Most of these students, sadly, we talk about free speech and the lack of it. They feel suppressed because they've lost their voice because of the intimidation and the fear that you mentioned earlier of being excluded. Not to mention the Jewish students who had physical fear when they were being physically harassed. That's a separate conversation.
You say that as if it's a side comment.
So we were talking here about sadly. But that's for the most part been addressed, I hope. But this idea that the fact that we live on a campus, in a culture, in a world, in a moment where people are afraid to speak their conscience, afraid to speak their truth because of the idea that there's a threat to people's sense of self, sense of freedom, opportunities, that they're going to be suppressed or oppressed for taking a position that reflects their conscience, is something that must be fought with every tool we have. And we're starting to see the results of that, because the taste of freedom is powerful. And I've encouraged students to try it one time and see how it feels, and it's so liberating. And you want more of it. It could be addictive to feel free, and if they can spread that and share that with their students, I think the power of that freedom and the joy, the sweetness of being free, is going to ultimately start pervading the society, and that's how we're going to come back.
Chazak v'ematz. More power to you, Rabbi Zarchi. Thank you very much. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation with Rabbi Zarchi, filmed here on location at Chabad House at Harvard, Cambridge, Massachusetts. As always, if you enjoy these episodes, please follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Share a link with a friend who would enjoy being educated and learning more beyond the headlines and between the lines. I'm Eylon Levy, and thanks for joining us.